The weekend is upon us. And it's a big weekend, actually. You know, kind of the gray sky doldrum, if you will, of November. We expect that. But the good news is at least it's somewhat warm outside. But there is continued chatter and discussion to have regarding not just the Colts, but the weekend in sports in general. And we will incorporate those of you listening to the program today on the company over the course of the next 3 hours. We appreciate you listening as always. Good afternoon to you. My name is Jake Query. Eddie Garrison, who, by the way, Eddie, you know, is very coy sometimes. He likes to kind of play the tough guy role, doesn't outwardly show his sentimentality, not a man that easily cries about things, doesn't watch beaches and sentimental movies, baseball catcher, so he's used to having a little bit of dirt around, you know, more of a rough and gruff guy.
But, I mean, I watched Fast Times at Ridgemont High. Is that not a sentimental
watch Fast Times. That counts. But you're more, in terms of Fast Times, you like to pretend yourself to be more the Jefferson or the Damone than the Ratner, right? But
although
deep down,
like
you
Ratner
have your moments of
sometimes.
Rat, right?
Yes.
And your sentimentality is able to shine through. The glow of your heart can shine through, even through the extra insulation.
That's right.
And you look like E.T. today with the heart glowing because of the kindness and generosity of yours truly. I saw something today that I knew you'd like and brought it into you, and I've never seen such a radiant glow out of you.
I'm curious of where you got these because, you know, you usually have to go out of the state for these such things.
Those are the G-rated, family-friendly watermelon gummies.
Darn it.
That I have brought to
It was the same packaging, though.
Eddie Garrison today. I know, but those are the, believe me, those are the Indiana version of them. Jimmy Cook going to be out today, by the way, as he yesterday, interesting because yesterday I had the colonoscopy, and then today Jimmy woke up and was feeling under the weather and said, you know what, and I appreciate it. Jake, you've still got like traces probably of the whatever they put in you, like the anesthesia or whatever, so you might be compromised, so I'm going to stay home because I'm feeling under the weather. I said, that's cool. So Jimmy will take the day off today. He'll be back with us, of course, and we'll be full force on Monday. There's a lot to talk about, including the storyline of Anthony Richardson, and I get it. I understand and I realize and I respect that to a lot of people, and probably to those of us doing this radio show as well as the morning guys and John. The storyline does feel like a broken record. But when new stuff comes out, we pass that along. And I got to thinking about this last night, and I'm going to ask for you folks to deal with me here on one of my, like, really bad analogies, okay? And you know what it sounds like every time we have one of the query. Now, I think some of my analogies are brilliant, but oftentimes people find them to be really bad analogies, which leads to this sound effect, of course. Okay. That's that fella playing the vacuum cleaner at Fish, right?
Apparently that's what they call it.
My cousin went to the Fish show and periodically still sends me photos of how great the Fish show was. And I think it's only because he's excited about the fact that we're going to go see Oasis in July in Manchester. And he's setting the bar of it better be as good as Fish, because I'm the Oasis guy. He's the Fish guy. And I'm like, okay. And if it's, I mean, that's a tough bar for Oasis to meet up with. But here is the analogy I'm going to give. And I do it partially because I think it's an important subject to bring up to people, partially because it involves me, which is, you know, more often than not my favorite subject, but at least I admit it. I mean, I love me some me. And then because of the Colts. But yesterday, as everybody knows, because I mentioned it and we had fun with it, you know, I had a colonoscopy. I had a routine colonoscopy. I did not have any reason to go in like some sort of a physical and there was a warning sign. But it is very important, men and women as well. But it's very important, certainly if you are over the age of 45. You could start over the age of 40, but if you're over the age of 45 and certainly over the age of 50, I am 52, to have a colonoscopy, which is a very simple procedure, but you do have to go under for it, and it is a little bit intimidating. I've had to have it before. It was probably 15 years ago because I had diverticulitis. That's a whole different talk show. Everything's fine. But going into it, I've known for a while that I had to have this procedure done. And like most people, you try to find the shortcut. You try to find a way not to do it because it's just an arduous process, and you got to carve out basically 2 days out of your schedule to kind of get things cleared literally and figuratively. There's a huge mental hurdle that goes in with getting this procedure done. And you know, even if you've done it before, that it's not a big deal. But you're like, yeah, but then I've got to have somebody pick me up, and I can't drive for a day, and I might be kind of goofy, and I don't want to say something embarrassing, and I don't want to do anything to humiliate myself, et cetera, et cetera. And so you have all of these hesitations, even though you've been through it before. You have all these hesitations, and you have all of these, like, you're creating these mental hurdles in your mind about it. And you're like, oh, man. And then you find out that there are other tests that you can do that are pretty close to effective, but not as 100% effective. But you can kind of shortcut it and Band-Aid it and get by with that for a couple of years by doing those and buy yourself a little more time, right? Because you're like, I don't know that I want to go through all the prep work and everything else. And then finally you say, you know what? Okay, I'm going to do this. So you get the prep work, and by the prep work, I think everybody knows what I'm talking about, either a pill form or a solution that you spend basically an entire evening cleaning yourself out. It's not fun. It's not terrible. And it's a process that before you know it, you're like, oh, okay, I guess actually the process is over with. And then you go to sleep and you wake up and you go in and you're ready to do this procedure and you're like, I don't know, and they wheel you in and they say, listen, we're going to put a little IV in you, and then you might get a little bit drowsy, and then before you know it, it's over. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. Now, in the past when I had this done, it was a much longer recovery process because they inflate you with this huge gas to open everything up, and then you're sitting around and you're kind of drooling on yourself, and this gas is escaping out of you, and it's kind of embarrassing, and you got to sit for like 20 minutes before they finally even let you go. I went yesterday, and I realized after the fact, wait a minute, they didn't do any of that. Like I'm sure they do something to expand you a little bit, but it's not to the level of what it was 15 years ago, let's say. So it is a much simpler process. And once it's over with, then I can look at it and go, forever I talked myself into why each step of this was going to be worse than it was because I was going off of the precedent of the negativity that I remember from it from like 15 years ago when it happened before. And I think that's exactly what we're witnessing with the 2024 Indianapolis Colts. Maybe not even from the Colts standpoint, but from the standpoint of the media, the fans, the whatever it may be. The Colts knew that there was a process that they had to eventually go through of getting a franchise quarterback. They've done it before. They did it 30 years ago with Jeff George. And then they did it again 25 years ago with Peyton Manning. And then they just transitioned from Peyton Manning into Andrew Luck. But now that they knew that process was eventually going to be there once Luck retired, they knew they had to do this. And they tried to Band-Aid it. They tried to do like the lesser procedure that gets like 80% effectiveness or 60% effectiveness, and it kind of worked. And then they found another one that it was pretty good, and then they found out it was a false positive. And they're like, I don't know. Like, now we're back to the square. So finally they said, you know what? We're just going to have to clear the schedule, and we're going to have to basically go through the process of preparing for this procedure. And that process we are still in the middle of with Anthony Richardson. And when you go through the process of the preparation, oftentimes you think like kind of your preparation's done, and then you're like, oh, no, wait a minute. I'm not completely done yet. And that's what the problem is in preparing a quarterback in the NFL as a franchise quarterback and going through that process is you think on numerous occasions that the player is ready to go. And you talk yourself into it. And when things look optimistic, you convince yourself that you are fully ready to go and that everything's not that bad because you're going based on the precedent of when you've had good experience in the past with this. But when things all of a sudden slightly hiccup, you immediately fall back to the negativity that you think about from previous experience, and you go, oh, I don't know. I don't know. See, here we go again. This is what I was afraid of. I knew that, like, I was going to be drooling on myself and somebody's going to try to videotape me in the car and put it on YouTube, but I'm acting silly. And then you find out that over the course of time, as was the case yesterday that I found out with this procedure, it was much easier than the times I've done it before. I was overcomplicating it. And then I went through it, and I thought, well, that was easy.
You overcomplicating something?
I know. Is that
what?
Usually I make things very easy, Eddie. I am the definition of, I'm like, is it Harvey Keitel in Pulp Fiction? Who's the one that plays the guy that just comes in and cleans everything up? I'm like the wolf. Isn't that who it was? I just come in and I'm like, you know what? What's the issue, guys? Let me come in and just take care of it. Or I overthink things a lot. I think with the Colts at times, we overthought when Anthony Richardson was just automatically ready. But more so, I think the Colts might have knee-jerked on times when they thought, okay, all hell's breaking loose, and what we're seeing now is a young player that's not ready to go, because they might have been going based on precedent. And then when they pulled him out, there was conversation about, from myself, admittedly, I think John, I think most people that called this show thought to themselves, once they pulled Anthony Richardson out, it's going to be really difficult to put him back in as the starter. And we'll see how he responds to it. But we go based on the precedent of years past, because we saw that when Jeff George wasn't the starter and then Jack Trudeau was put in, or Jeff George was going to be the starter, but then, like, for a brief while, Craig Erickson was put in. I think it was maybe Steve Walsh. The yo-yo of that stunted the development and the growth of Jeff George, because you had all kinds of different coordinators and coaches. It wasn't really the fault of Jeff George, but there was no solid footing for any quarterback, anybody in the organization of that era. And so it gets labeled a certain way where you're like, I don't want to go back to that inconsistency. I don't want to go back to that. And you think about processes before, and that makes you feel like the process that you're currently going through is going to have this topsy-turvy nature to it. I think it is possible. I'm not saying that Anthony Richardson's going to be a long-time franchise quarterback of the Colts. But for those of us that are like, what's he going to be like now that he's back in the starting position? The roster itself seems okay with this. Almost elated by it, to be honest with you. Loosened up, lightened by it. And maybe maybe I'm guilty of this. Maybe I'm guilty of assuming the worst-case scenario once Richardson lost his position, not because of Richardson, not because of Ballard, not because of Steichen, not because of Michael Pittman Jr., but because of what I've seen based on precedent of preparation in the past. And you have to go through it sometimes to then realize that the preparation and the process is actually not as difficult as what you had remembered. And it can go, dare I say, bad pun here, smoother than what you thought it was going to go. Which, by the way, is my long-winded way of saying that if you are hesitant about getting a colonoscopy, don't be, because it is actually a remarkably easier procedure than what you thought. But the thing with Richardson now, and Stephen Holder has an interesting article up on ESPN.com right now talking about the fact that it was, in fact, as he talks to more people, and this is what we had said at the time. What we had said at the time, and I had said, was that, and I don't think any of this ever was, there's two kinds of immaturity. There's the immature kid in school that is sitting in the back of the room throwing spitballs at the chalkboard and making fart noises with his armpit, okay? And then there's the immature kid that forgets that on Wednesdays is when the math homework's due, and so he turns it in on Thursday because he forgot to write down that Wednesday is math day, and it takes him longer to get that because he just doesn't have the focus. That's an immaturity that comes with getting older and going through the reps, essentially. And there are two kinds of immature in the National Football League. There's Johnny Manziel, staying out, partying all night, going to Coachella, tearing up couches.
What's the difference between immature and irresponsible?
Okay. Very good question. And this is what I would say. Irresponsible knows the difference. If you're immature like Johnny Manziel, You're going out and you're just doing stuff because you haven't even thought about the fact that your actions have consequences, right? You don't even know any different. You haven't been put in the position, or you have been put in a position where there's never been accountability for you. So you're just going out and you're just doing stuff and whatever else. Irresponsible is when you know what, this is just my opinion. Irresponsible means that you know this is what you're supposed to do and you count on doing it, but at the 11th hour, something else comes along that's more fun, and so you just completely forget. You're just irresponsible about it. Immaturity just simply means like you're not even necessarily, you haven't reached the point of the comprehension or the grasp of what it is that you need to do. And I think in Anthony Richardson's case, he was naive as to what he needed to do. And so what I'm saying is this. There's the Johnny Manziel level of immaturity. There's the famous stories of Jamarcus Russell, right, who was the number 1 overall pick by the Raiders, and the famous story is that they gave him a tape and said, you need to go home and watch this film, see what you think, watch the defense. And they intentionally gave him a blank tape. And then he came back on Monday and they said, what'd you think? And he said, I could totally see what you're talking about. Yeah, I definitely saw it on this, that. Like, this guy's lying. He didn't even put it in the machine. That comes with, that's just an immaturity of not even understanding what it is, although one is probably irresponsible. But in Richardson's case, I don't think that Anthony Richardson was staying out at the club till 4 a.m. I don't think that Anthony Richardson was having a bunch of people over and throwing a house party and then coming in asleep and falling asleep in team meetings. I don't think it's that. I think Anthony Richardson thought, okay, I go to class each day, and then on Sunday we play football. And he wasn't necessarily registering that, like, no, Wednesday's the day that, yes, everybody else gets here at 6, you get here at 5:30. I remember, Jeff George saying, when we had him on, we had Jeff on at the beginning of the year, and Jeff George said, you just have to know when you're the quarterback that you are going to be the first person in the building and the last person to leave. And I told the story last week. I've told it probably once a week for 20 years, or since it happened. But the story before the Super Bowl in Miami, when Peyton Manning looked at the forecast, knew it was supposed to rain, and when they got done with their final practice, pulled Jeff Saturday aside and said, look, we got another hour here, and had a bucket full of water and said, you're going to dunk these footballs in water, get it soaking wet, and then snap them to me. We're just going to do that for an hour until we're used to snapping soaking wet footballs. Did the Colts have a fumble? Did the Colts have problems with snaps when they're playing a Super Bowl in the pouring rain? They'd prepared it. Because the reality is, as a quarterback, your job is just simply go in and go to practice, watch film, and be prepared, right? No, your job as a quarterback is to think above and beyond what everybody else is doing. And Anthony Richardson apparently was not doing that. And Stephen Holder's article today talks about how what it was it is becoming more and more clear that Anthony Richardson's missteps were not anything of malice, but rather of naivete, of just, look, being here is one thing, but being present is another. I mean, I've said to people before, I know you're here, but you're not present. You're physically in the room, but you're not present. And I think there were times where Anthony Richardson simply was not present when he was in the room. And that's what they need out of him, because this is your franchise. This is the guy that the rest of the locker room is looking towards. Now, what's interesting is I think that the Colts felt that the roster was feeling let down by what they felt was a team captain leader and face of the franchise that was not present. And I think the Colts erred in reading the room. Whether it was Chris Ballard or Shane Steichen, I think they erred in reading the room and thought, we owe it to DeForest Buckner, Quentin Nelson, Ryan Kelly. We owe it to these guys to give ourselves the best chance to win, and the best chance to win right now is to go with Joe Flacco because he is preparing, he's ready to go, he's more consistent in his passing. And I think that they thought their locker room was going to reward them with an extra oomph of play because they respected and appreciated the fact that a change was being made almost at the sacrifice of the long term for the Colts in order for the short-term gain of the roster. And I think they misread the room because I think once Joe Flacco went out there, and in particular, once you saw, nothing against him as a person, but once they saw that Joe Flacco was not able to elevate their level of play, then I think those guys thought, what are we doing here? At least go to the guy that gives us more option when a play's breaking down and can run the football, and that if we're going to ride with them, we're going to ride with them. And then the bigger thing I think that happened was Jim Irsay is a man who does care about what people think of his franchise. I don't think Jim Irsay is a bad person at all. I think he's a good person. I think he's a good-hearted person. He has his eccentricities, but I think at his core, he is passionate about people, and I think he's passionate about his franchise. And I think the way people see and digest and interpret his franchise is incredibly important to him. And when they made a move by misreading the room and misreading the locker room, by taking away a guy that they felt simply wasn't doing the extra step necessary and they needed to send a message to him, once they removed that guy and then they saw what the locker room thought, that was one thing. But most importantly to me, if I had to handicap it, is that Jim Irsay saw what was being said about his franchise by people that he holds very, very close to his heart and his chest and his mind in terms of valuing their opinion, not only of the National Football League, but of their experience as part of the Horseshoe. And when you have former players who have major platforms and major microphones coming out and questioning the integrity and the direction of your franchise, then I think that's when Jim Irsay stepped in and said, no more here in terms of the misreading of the room. We're going to circle back. We're going to make a correction here. Who has the whiteout? Does anybody have the whiteout? Because we're going to white out what we just said. I know 3 days ago we said Joe Flacco's the guy. Who has the whiteout? Let me shake that. And let me go ahead and put the whiteout down and put in Anthony Richardson's name. So we can then go to the locker room and say, okay, the guy that gives you a chance when plays break down, the guy that we told you that we were going to grow behind, we are going to put more time into that. We're going to tell everybody that, like, everything got A-okay, hunky-dory in 2 weeks. And I want the former players who, it's all about the shoe, guys, like, you just want to know that, you play for the Colts and it's guys that are all chips in. They wanted to make sure that those guys could be able to then tell a larger audience on a bigger platform with their microphone, the franchise I played for, I'm again proud to be a member of that franchise because they have vision. And I think Irsay basically walked down the hall and said, you know what, we got to about-face this whole thing. And I think that's where we are. And now the Colts face the Jets, and Anthony Richardson is back under center. And they're going to say, you know what, we want to put the best look out there. And right now that's what we feel it is, and that's what we're going with. By the way, if you want the best look when it comes to your car, of course you have a monthly car wash program, right? Whether it be any of the different car wash programs, a sticker in the front window or a sticker on the license plate. When you go to Jiffy Lube, any of your Central Indiana Jiffy Lube locations, all you have to do is pull in. And by the way, Glenn and Pendleton Pike, great dude. And that guy absolutely took care of my car top to bottom. You pull into any of the locations, no appointment necessary, one-stop shopping when it comes to your automotive needs. Go to a Jiffy Lube, point to the team member and say, hey, let me point to you right here and show you that I'm a member of a monthly car wash program. No problem, right there. $20 off your signature service oil change and a free tire rotation just because they're going to love and respect the fact that you have that kind of care about the way your car looks. They want to make sure they have the same care about the way your car runs. So stop by any Jiffy Lube between now and the end of the year to take advantage of that special. Anthony Richardson back under center. We'll talk about that on the show today. Also, high school football in the thick of the playoffs. Kyle Neddenriep going to join us coming up bottom of the 1 o'clock hour. Kevin Bowen at the 2 o'clock hour. I've got a really good conversation yesterday with a young man and his mother that are going to be featured in our Franciscan Health Good for the Heart Feelgood Friday. I look forward to that coming up at 2:30. And the Pacers in action tonight, and they're going to get some familiarity over the weekend with somebody. I'll let you know what I'm talking about, and we will do that conversation as well on the other side on this Friday edition. Query & Company, 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan. Of notes before we get into the Pacers and the Miami Heat, who are in town tonight at the Fieldhouse. Number one, want to let people know, do we have the breaking news sounder by chance? Meant to get to this last week, but I was obviously gone on the night of the tally of it. And then apparently there was a lot of heavy recounting, and there were some complaints and, I guess, question about integrity. But my mom, of course, is a teacher at Children's Corner Preschool.
Mm-hmm.
And Children's Corner Preschool, the finest on the north side of Indianapolis, every year they do during election time for the kids, and I think this is for the 3-year-olds.
They make signs about wet leaves.
They warn the kids about do we have my mom's do we happen to have my mom's warning, by the way? Because I know that we've played it before, but Eddie, it's worth repeating. It's worth having to play a second time because it's of great significance, especially this time of year, because we're a little bit late this year on when the leaves are falling, right? And my mom initially had called like in September with that warning, and then called the other day to make sure that I was. She said, "Did you already let people know my warning?" And I said, "I did, Mom. Yeah." But it's very applicable this weekend, right here.
Hi, Jake. It's that time of year again. It's a little bit early, but I wanted to get this PSA out early so that everybody is careful. The leaves are starting to turn, and they're falling to the ground. There is rain predicted for the next couple of days, and so I just wanted you to let your listeners know that we have to all be very careful because the rain and the wet leaves are just a lethal mix, and an accident can happen in a flash. So everyone be careful out there, but at the same time, please enjoy the beautiful colors of this fall.
Okay, there you go. So that's Mom's announcement. Now, speaking of colors, they had the Children's Corner annual color election on what everybody's favorite color was, and it was highly contested this year. They did recounts, but we are here to announce officially now with all precincts reporting. Do we have the breaking news sounder here?
Not sure if we've ever had the double breaking news sounder for anything.
Right. Light blue was decided to be the winner in a very close recount over orange. Purple coming in third, by the way. That was the independent, I guess. Although the purple's not independent, actually. It's a mix of a couple of things.
Do you know who the incumbent was?
That's an excellent question. Excellent question. I believe also light blue was the incumbent.
Wow.
Very good question. Now, again, this is just strictly kids voting their favorite color, and they're 3, so have a heart. But speaking of blue, before we get to the Pacers and the blue and gold, I'll let everybody know this. Just I don't know if our show. I'm very curious to see what happens with this. So there's a new social media page that apparently was started by the starter of Twitter, and I'm probably late to this party. That's not surprising at all, right? Blue Sky. And I realize that Blue Sky, I think a lot of people probably see this as a political thing. I have no idea if that's the case or not. I simply know that, and I like Twitter, X, I know it's now called. I like it. I've been on it for years. I have great interactions with people from various backgrounds and opinions and everything, and I think that's healthy dialogue. I enjoy it. However, at the fault of no living individual, on my X account, for example, it is getting more and more difficult to interact with people because with anything that I post, the number of spam or fake accounts that just inundate. I mean, it's difficult. And I know that maybe is not the case for everybody. I don't know. But my timeline as well is such. And I'm seeing more and more people that are going over to this Blue Sky. Now, we had this with Threads, and the Threads thing lasted like 72 hours, right? I mean, like nobody's stuck with Threads.
I never got on Threads.
Yeah. And so I joined Threads, and that meant that I had to join Instagram, and all I ever see on the Instagram is Britney Spears dancing in her bikini. But so I joined this Blue Sky yesterday only because if this is where people are going, I want to make sure that my name, that I have like the name handle. So same handle, at Jake Query, JakeQuery. And then you got to put in like that Blue Sky, like whatever it is. But if you go to the Blue Sky, if you're on there, at Jake Query, I would love if you give me a follow, and then if it gets big enough, I guess we'll start using that, as well as I've seen some other places that are using both now to get their messaging out there, and it is a little easier to navigate through, and it works exactly the same as the original Twitter did. So it's a little more familiar than, say, the Threads deal. Pacers in action tonight, taking on the Heat at Gainbridge Fieldhouse. Now, this is, Eddie, the first of two that they're going to have with Miami, correct?
That is correct. Tonight is a Emirates NBA Cup group play game. It's the first of 4 for the Pacers.
It's the in-season tournament, right?
No, it's the Emirates NBA Cup.
Which is the in-season tournament.
Formerly the in-season tournament, yes.
What I'm saying is, for people unfamiliar with it, it is the tournament that takes place during the season itself that, for familiarity's sake for people, is what we have known as the in-season tournament, right?
That's what it was known as. Now it is known as the NBA Cup.
Well, it's a sponsored event, I get. So, so that tonight is the first game of that. Now, Sunday is not, correct?
Correct. Sunday is just a normal regular season game between the Heat and the Pacers. That game's at 5 o'clock.
I can't recall with the in-season tournament a year ago. I know that the Pacers obviously went to the finals, and they did that because they won every game. Do you have to win? Do you have to continue to win every game between now and when the Final Four is set, or do we just think that because the Pacers did that, didn't have to do it? Because there's no like best 2 of 3 scenarios, are there?
No, there are not best of 3 scenarios.
Is it single elimination all the way through?
Correct. Well, no. So you have the 4 group play games. After you get out of the group play, you get into the actual tournament. That itself is single elimination.
Gotcha. Okay. So it's the best record amongst the 4 in group.
Yes, and then I believe 1 wild card team from each conference makes it.
And the Pacers group is who? Do we know?
It is the Raptors, the Pacers, the Bucks, the Pistons, and the Heat.
One would think the Bucks are going to be the toughest competition in that. The Raptors have really struggled, obviously, right? The Pistons, although the Pistons gave them a little bit of fit, right?
Detroit just beat Miami the other night on Tuesday night because of Eric Spoelstra. I don't know if you saw that or not, but Spoelstra called a timeout when they didn't have any timeouts in a tie game, and Detroit then got a technical free throw, and they won off that technical free throw.
Does Chris Webber still do television? He doesn't, does he?
I don't think so.
Can you imagine if Chris Webber would have been on the television microphone at the time that somebody called a timeout with none left? Okay, so I said we were going to talk more about the Pacers. What better guy to do it than Chris Denari, and he will actually do that with us next. The television voice of the Indiana Pacers on the FanDuel Pacers Television Network is our guest on the other side. Pacers in action tonight. Miami Heat, the opponent. They're going to get familiar with one another because it's the first of two over the weekend against that foe. Joining us now on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line, you will hear and see him on the call with the FanDuel Pacers Television Network. Chris Denari joins us. Chris, I'll begin with this. The Pacers, to me, at this point, listen, you can see the flashes, right, of the fact that this team has the capability to carry on what they were able to get so much excitement about a year ago, but the consistency has still kind of been the issue, even sometimes within a game, right? Because they'll have a great quarter like they had in Charlotte and then back that up with a bad quarter that lets the game get away from them. What would be the key issue you think that is prohibiting them from being able to get the consistent footing that we're looking for?
I would say, Jake, probably rebounding from the standpoint that to your point, you look back at the game the other night in Orlando. They got off to a great start, had a 12-point first-half lead, but in the end, they were out-rebounded by 10, and that really prohibits them from getting out in transition. They're a much better team in transition and early in the shot clock. If you've got to go deep into the shot clock, especially against a team like Orlando, which is one of the better defensive teams in the league, and they play very physical, then that's an issue that the Pacers have had. So, we've seen them when they run and get in transition against really good teams, against Dallas, against New York, against Boston. Three high-level teams, they scored 130 points or more. But it's been the other games where they've struggled offensively, and they've already scored below 100 points three times. It only happened one time last year, and they've shot below 40% twice, and that never happened last year. So definitely some things they've got to work on. I think as they get more comfortable with the pace, and I do think the last week or so playing without Andrew Nembhard and Aaron Nesmith has really prohibited the success that you've had from the bench, because a number of those bench guys are now in the starting lineup. But they've been good at home except for the opening loss to Philadelphia, and they've got a couple of home games here this weekend, as you said, against Miami. 7 of the first 11 have been on the road, so they knew that would be a little daunting early, and see how they adapt starting tonight.
Chris, I've asked this question to a couple of people. I'll bring you into it as well. Chris Denari, our guest. Do you believe that, and maybe the answer is none of the above here, okay, but does Benedict Mathurin really get going offensively once Tyrese Halliburton becomes a little more aggressive in penetrating the basketball, or does Tyrese Halliburton get a little bit more aggressive with the basketball once Benedict Mathurin gets going?
It's a great question. I mean, they both were so good in that fourth quarter against New York, and while Tyrese, did not have a good game offensively Wednesday night against Orlando, Benedict did. I mean, he had another 20-point game. But I think this team is just at its best when Tyrese, not even necessarily scoring, but what we saw in the first quarter in Orlando. He had 8 first-quarter assists and did not score, but he found Miles Turner. He found Pascal Siakam and Benedict Mathurin. So, Mathurin is clearly a guy that can get his own, and he's one of the few guys that will create his own driving to the basket. But I still think this team is at its best when Tyrese is creating for others. And my opinion is I don't think he has to have the 25 and 10 or 25 and 12, because you've got a little bit different team now. I thought early last year and into the in-season tournament, which is now the NBA Cup, the Pacers had to have Tyrese put up some big numbers. But as the season went along and you made the acquisition of Pascal Siakam, I thought that took a little bit of the heat off Tyrese and having to put up the big offensive numbers. So, but to your point, I think a lot hinges when Tyrese is humming and when that ball is moving, then I think the Pacers are a much different team.
Chris Denari is our guest on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line. Chris, I don't think that a lot of people thought that we would see Johnny Furphy this early in his career. He's obviously a very young player. Got his first 7 points as an NBA player. Is he somebody that realistically we may see getting into the rotation, or that's him in the background, as a matter of fact, that's how young he is. Are we going to see him possibly be a guy that can give them spot minutes over the course of the year, or is this strictly out of necessity and it's gravy that he's played well with it?
Well, I think it's a little both. I mean, I guess my almost 3-year-old grandson is urging me over here to the TV. No, I think it's a little of both. I think they have to have him right now just because of the numbers that they have. And I've seen him in the last, 2 games play a lot more confidently than he did early in the season. And I think that's his teammates making sure that, he feels comfortable and that you can take shots. I think oftentimes when somebody steps in and replacing somebody, you're a little bit hesitant. And I think his teammates, his coaches have said, hey, look, you've just got to do what you do. He's still very young. He's only 19 years old. He reclassified to go to Kansas. So this guy could easily be 1 year in college right now. But I think he's somebody, he's got good size. He shoots the ball pretty well, and he knows the game. So we'll just have to wait and see. But they need him right now because of the injuries to Nembhard and Neesmith.
Chris, if I'm not mistaken, Chris Denari, our guest, and I know you got to run, this weekend is the 130th Monon Bell game. This game is, 63-57-9. Wabash leads the series. It's been incredibly tight over the course of the history of it. You are somebody that went to Wabash. I believe DePauw's 9-0. Wabash is 8-1. So this is an epic matchup. As a Wabash guy, for our listeners who I've always encouraged to go to the Monon Bell game, tell me why the game matters.
Well, it matters because of such a great rivalry between two very like schools, other than the fact that Wabash doesn't have any women on campus, but two liberal arts schools that are located about 30 miles away, great respect for one another. I have a number of, friends that are DePauw grads, like I have a number of friends and classmates that are Wabash grads. It's just a sense of pride. I mean, it's Indiana-Purdue just at the Division III level. And I had the great opportunity as an undergrad to do 2 games play-by-play my junior and senior year. One was a loss at DePauw. One was a win at Wabash. I think a year later I was on the broadcast, and then I did the game a few years back at DePauw, which was a tremendous game. Wabash rallied to win. And so it's just a great rivalry. And what's neat about this weekend, Jake, is it's not just playing for the Bell. It's playing for the conference championship and a trip to the NCAA Division III football tournament. So there's so much on the line. There's just great pride among the schools. Both of these schools have so many alumni here in Indianapolis, and I think that says a lot about just the opportunities you have as a graduate, the bonds that you build with your respective schools. And I do think there'll probably be 8,000 or 9,000 there tomorrow in Greencastle. So,
Chris,
it's
honestly,
a phenomenal experience.
Everybody, I'm not kidding you. I think it might be. I mean, I'm going to remove the Indianapolis 500 because you know what that day means to me, right? You and I get to share that day together. But outside of the Indy 500, I think it might be the greatest sports tradition in Indiana. I think everybody should go at least once. There's just something about it. It's awesome. And it's particularly awesome if you are like me and you don't have a rooting interest and you get to see, for example, the visiting team win and then take the Bell back up, to the other team's school 30 miles up the road with a caravan. And, I mean, it's pretty awesome. It's pretty awesome.
It is. And I remember back in the day, and I'm sure it still happens, if you have the Bell, you are told to protect it, especially that week. We had 24 hours, 24/7, protect the Bell when the Bell was on your campus. And
were you ever on the night watch? Were you the night shift guy?
That was pledge duties among the fraternities at Wabash. It was 24/7. I think because I was doing later in my career, because I was doing the game and I oversaw things, I maybe got off. But I think when we were freshmen, we all participated. And you probably sat by the Bell at 2:30 or 3 in the morning, making sure that somebody didn't come up from Greencastle to steal it.
By the way, were you in a fraternity at Wabash?
Yes, I was a Sigma Chi.
Okay, because I know a couple of guys that were Fijis at Wabash, and then when Shannon and I were in Scotland, we stayed in the same hotel as the Fiji national rugby team. And But I noticed none of them were wearing purple and white like my buddies, so apparently not the same thing. Chris Denari will be on the television call tonight, Pacers and Heat, and then again they will be playing one another on Sunday at the Fieldhouse. But tonight is the first game for them over the course of the season in the Emirates NBA Cup, previously known and still commonly known as the in-season tournament tonight. So this one is double special, I guess, if you will. Have a good call tonight, Chris. Appreciate the time.
All right. Thanks, Jake.
All right. The pride of Wabash as well as Westfield, Chris Denari, joining us on the program. Back into the Colts, by the way, and who might be on or off the practice field, final preparations for the New York Jets. We'll get into that, and then Kyle Neddenriep going to join us coming up in the next hour as well. It's a Friday edition. Happy weekend to you of Query and Company on the Fan. Colts and New York Jets coming up on Sunday from, I think the most harassment I've ever received from an opposing fan base, and I'm not a player, from my days working in television and covering the Colts on the road was in East Rutherford, back when they were in East Rutherford. They're still in East Rutherford, though, right?
Yes, sir.
For some reason, I thought MetLife Stadium was in Manhattan. Am I totally out of my mind there?
Nope, it's in Jersey.
What's the one that they built when they put the Super Bowl in New York?
I'm not sure.
I thought, what am I thinking of? Am I hallucinating here?
You very well could be.
That there was a stadium that they were going to put on the upper west side of Manhattan? I realized that they've always played in East Rutherford. This is going to drive me bonkers. Maybe it was that the original design for MetLife was that it was going to be on the upper west side, and then they decided to go ahead and put it in the same place as the Meadowlands, where the Meadowlands were. But at any rate, Jets fans, one time, I was doing stand-ups towards the end of the game. That's the thing that you see when somebody's standing on the field doing. And, I mean, the Jets fans were just ruthless. And finally threw like a hot dog at me. And I turned around, and I'm like, look.
Just the hot dog, no bun?
No, the bun was it was like in the wrapper.
Okay.
And I finally turned around, and I'm like, look, don't get mad at me just because, like, I'm drawing a paycheck today to be down here on the field, and you guys are up in the stands. And, like, because I know New Yorkers are great, right? They loved it. They loved the bark back, and then instantly it was like you'd have thought I was, worked with them or grew up with them or whatever. They were awesome. So, and then, you get the whole JETS, Jets. It's pretty awesome. But that's what Anthony Richardson's going to be seeing. I don't know if anybody will be throwing a hot dog at him, but there is pressure on him for certain. Some of that is external. Some of that hopefully is internal because he wants to play well, obviously. I think the thing that more, and I know you guys talked about this a little bit yesterday, Eddie, the thing that I most want to see from Richardson, I want to see, and I'm going to borrow a phrase from the Colts from previous times, I want to see him make the layups.
Yep.
We know that he can throw the ball a 65-yard pass falling off the back of his foot. We know that, right? But what about the quick out to Josh Downs? What about the over the middle to Michael Pittman, who's been a full participant all week? What about simply the little screen or the little flare out of the backfield? Those are the plays where he has erred. And I think that he also, the other thing that I'd like to see, if Anthony Richardson's front yard in the summertime, it feels like only the left side of his yard is green. You know why?
Why is that?
Because his sprinkler goes, and then as soon as it gets through two rotations starting from the left, it either starts spinning in circularly, or it takes off, or it just spits water way too high into the neighbor's yard. But it doesn't rotate through and oscillate on its rotation all the way through its reps.
Now, what's the full oscillation sound like, Jake?
Do you realize, Eddie, the fortune you have of the access, of the spontaneous nature of my ability to do those kinds of things? You didn't think that I really was going to be able to do that, did you?
Oh, no, I just wanted to hear you do it.
Yeah. But you get my point. Richardson still, what I want to see is his ability to check all the way across the field as opposed to just seeing his first one or two reads and then deciding to alter the play, tuck and run, whatever it might be. And they are clearly coming up with some design run plays for him, but you want to see him stay healthy, but you just want to see a maturation and a comfort level of what it is that he needs to be doing from one play to the next, and even just within the play itself. I mean, an NFL play, quite frankly, has several several things happening within it. And from the time you snap the ball, I mean, you have option A, option B, option C. But even before that, the plays that you have called when you come up to the line, you walk up to the line and you're looking over it and you realize we just called a pass play, a quick out to the left, and I can tell they're bringing a nickel over to that side. That's not going to work. So I've got to come right up to and we have an alternate play for that play, which is a quick burst of Jonathan Taylor to the right. I've got to audible to that. So I got to let everybody know on the line and Taylor as well that we're now going to plan B here. I don't know how often – I'm not saying Richardson doesn't do that.
Kill.
That's right. Apple. You know, so in that regard, I want to be able to see the progression of those reads. You know what I mean? But I just want to see him hit the layups, quite frankly. Eddie, yourself?
What I said yesterday, and I don't know if you feel this way or not, Jake, is it's not so much what I want to see from Anthony Richardson. It's what I want to see from everyone else. I want to see an easier and more simple offense for him, something that suits him better, kind of like last year in his rookie season where it was a lot of RPOs, it was a lot of quick hitters. It got the ball out of his hand, didn't allow him to sit back there and try to overthink things, hold on to the ball too long, and wait for someone to get open versus anticipating somebody to get open and throwing them open. I just want to see them lean more into the run game and probably a simpler passing attack because the Jets are one of the best defenses in terms of passing yards allowed. They allow the second fewest, and I believe they allow the 8th most rushing yards per game. So if they can lean a little bit more into the run game and then try to get those quick hitters that you were just talking about to Michael Pittman Jr., Josh Downs, or even Jonathan Taylor out of the backfield, then I think you can bring him along and build his confidence back up because that's the one thing I feel like that is not talked about a lot. It's just his confidence in general, especially coming off of benching. You need to find a way to get him going early to boost his confidence to make him feel more comfortable as the game goes along.
The one thing that I can tell you is that, according to the Colts, Bernhard Raimann's going to be out. I mean, we knew. So the left side of the line, again, you've got something there that's been a staple. But that knee situation for Bernhard Raimann, he's been ruled out at Colts.com. So we knew that. We knew that he's going to be gone. Others that we look to see, I think everybody else you feel pretty good about because of the way that they have trended those that have missed some time in order to get back on the field. DeForest Buckner, like, for example, being one of those that we now know is, I think we can safely say, is back from that injury and is one that we're going to be able to see play. Occasionally on Friday, we do what I call the former Colt Friday. I thought this guy would be a perfect player to have on because he can kind of talk about just the situation that happens with a quarterback when you're the starter, then you're out, then you're back on. He needs no introduction in this area, but I'll do it anyway. He is the pride of Carmel High School, the pride of Purdue, and, of course, the Indianapolis Colts. You also hear him on Purdue and their radio network. Mark Herrmann joining us now in the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line. Mark, I appreciate in a pinch coming on. I wanted to get specifically to this. You know, you played the position. So for Anthony Richardson, if you're somebody who, like, is kind of handed the keys, you're a young player, you're a starter, then you have to kind of sit back and watch, and now you're put back in. What does that do to the psyche of a quarterback?
Yeah, Jake, it's all a journey, and, for most, it's not going to be a smooth path as you enter this league. There are going to be some hiccups, and, as a top draft pick, you're certainly dependent upon to come in and perform, but that's not always the case over the years where probably 50% of number one draft picks at that position have not fared well, or at least they've taken maybe longer than a lot of people wished or hoped or thought. So, Anthony is going through some time now where he's still learning what it takes to be an NFL quarterback. And it's not just showing up on Sunday, but it's preparation. It's getting your psyche ready and being able to handle all that it takes to be a professional, successful quarterback. And I think, he's a young guy to begin with, Jake, and I think the learning process has just been a little more uphill for him at this point. And sometimes it's good to sit back like he has the last couple weeks and watched and learned, and then maybe he can put that to use when he gets back on the field on Sunday. So it's difficult, no question. Your competitive nature and your ego and all those things, you want to be the guy out there, but sometimes you got to take a step back and maybe learn some things and then put it to use when you get back.
Mark, in your playing career in the NFL, you played in 40 games. Now, in those 40 games, I mean, realistically, and maybe it's hard to go back and think this, but how many would you say, how far into it was it before you really felt comfortable and felt like things had slowed down?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good quarter of those games where you really felt good about what you're seeing and what you're processing and all those things. And, you can go up to the line of scrimmage and see one thing, and that second step in your drop back, things change quickly. So your ability to adjust on the fly and be able to put those coaching points into your head and put those into action. And I see a little slower process for Anthony as far as, okay, hit that back foot, turn the football loose. It's like a little bit of hesitation there, and as we all know, hesitation gets you killed. So that's where I see Anthony struggling right now is, turn it loose. Don't rely on that bazooka of an arm that you have, but anticipate your receiver coming out of the break. That ball should be in the air before he turns around. And until you're totally comfortable with the offense that Shane Steichen is trying to give him and just all the nuances from a defensive standpoint, it's going to be a tough 1, 2, 3 process, and going to your second or third or drop down past your running back. Those types of things take some time. So unfortunately, it's a world of impatience, and so we all want the best out of him quickly, but it's going to be an ongoing process that we're going to have to deal with.
Mark, when you look at your career, Mark Herrmann is our guest on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest line. When you look at your career at Purdue, an MVP in 3 different bowl games, the leading passer in the NCAA, and then getting into the NFL, which was the bigger adjustment? The ability for defenses to execute a completely different look than what they initially showed at the line at the professional level, or the limited amount of time you had to get the ball into a window because of the collapse time in the NFL versus college? Which one was the bigger adjustment?
Yeah, I mean, those are both big adjustments because those windows open and shut quickly. And if you're not ready to throw or make that decision quickly, and also keeping your feet moving, as we know, that pocket collapses quickly. And if you cannot anticipate what they're doing defensively, then that slows that process back in the pocket, and therefore you're having to process those things while you're dropping back and not enabling yourself to deliver the football. So they're going to try to do as much as they can confusion-wise and, change those pre-snap looks into post-snap different looks, and therefore creating some maybe some hesitation or just uncertainty for Anthony. So week by week those things are going to sort themselves out, but when you're throwing around 50% completions nowadays, that's just not acceptable. So I think Shane has got to find some easy completions for Anthony to start the game, get him in a rhythm of feeling comfortable, make your reads more half the field as opposed to trying to digest the entire secondary. Keep it on one side, maybe give him 2 options, boom, boom. If they're not there, then tuck it away and run.
Mark, what things, you are obviously a more trained eye about the quarterback position in the National Football League than 99% of people that are going to be watching, right? So when we see Anthony Richardson go out and take the first couple of series on Sunday, tell me what Mark Herrmann is going to be looking for that is going to indicate to him that Anthony Richardson is in a good or perhaps even a bad place. How are you going to be able to decipher just early on? Tell me what your eye looks for that my eye would not see.
Yeah, I think the struggle with him, Jake, is the accuracy part of it. We all know the strength of his arm, we'll see a beautiful deep ball, and then the next one is 10 feet over the guy's head. And sometimes we can't throw that fastball every time. So if I see a little touch, a little anticipation from Anthony to kind of get himself feeling good about himself, and as far as making that accurate throw on time, enable this guy to catch it on the run and make some yards after the catch. I would love to see that in the first couple of series where you're saying, okay, he knows where he's going with the football. He put it right on the numbers, and that's a good thing. So if those first couple of throws go sailing or one hops him or behind, then I'm concerned that, boy, he's lost some confidence and he's trying to aim the football, and instead of just turning it loose, having confidence in what you see, getting that throwing lane where you feel like you can deliver the football and your eyes meet, those are the telltale signs that I'm looking for. And if he struggles in those first couple of series, the home fans will start getting a little antsy. So I hope he comes out with some success early, puts it where he wants to, and then Jonathan Taylor becomes a factor, and then you're starting to move the football a little bit.
Mark, when it comes to hitting the layups, so to speak, okay, and I'm not talking about the ones that you hit that helped Carmel in the state high school basketball championships, right? But the 10-yard, the quick 10-yard pass or just a bubble screen pass, from a quarterbacking standpoint, is that accuracy found in release point, or is that accuracy found in making sure your foot placement is correct when you are then releasing the football?
Yeah, there's so many factors in delivering an accurate pass, and getting the shoulder turn and getting your feet set, and being able to, if the receiver's coming at you, take a little bit off. You don't have to throw the heater, and be able to. I have always said if a guy's open, you got to complete 90% of those, because there's going to be so many times where a guy's covered and you got to throw it on the dime. So if I'm Anthony and I see a guy that's open, I'm going to take a little off, make sure that he has room to adjust the football and not just throw that fastball that he has to, put it on a line and then there's no room for error. So take a little bit off, allow him to make the adjustment and make the easy catch. So if he can learn those things, because sometimes you got to feather it over the linebacker or underneath corner or, anticipate throwing away from the safety, all those things he's going to have to learn on the job. And if he can have like the early success, that's critical. But hit the open man, make sure that if he's open, you're getting him the football.
Mark, have you ever in your playing career, Mark Herrmann, our guest, whether it be professionally playing or just in your work as a broadcaster, I don't know where it might have been, but how much have you crossed paths with, if at all, former South Carolina running back George Rogers?
Pretty much zero. After those that Heisman ceremony, I've not been able to connect with George. So unfortunately, Hugh Green and those guys, and Mike Singletary, all the guys that I came out with in 1981. You just don't see them as much as you maybe would have anticipated. So that's that's one of the disappointing things. Guys that you competed hard against and respected from afar, you just don't bump into them as much as you'd hope.
Because I was thinking that if you saw him, you could tell him that he has your Heisman Trophy, right?
Well, yeah, he kind of took that from me, but I kind of helped him against Michigan because I didn't play well, and that maybe sealed my fate. But, no, George had a nice career, a very deserving winner, and, I can't take anything away from him. He was certainly deserving of the award that year.
Okay, lastly, Mark, before we let you go, of course, you're doing, radio for as well, along with Tim Newton, for your alma mater, the Purdue Boilermakers. I know it has not gone as people were hoping this year.
Yeah.
What do you look for here towards the end of the season just to kind of give some glimmer of a sign of progress or hope for Purdue?
Yeah, Jake, it's been awfully tough, and there's just frustration from top to bottom. And, when you lose 8 in a row and you're not competitive in a lot of those, you're just searching for answers and trying to find some glimmer of hope. And I think the guys are continuing to play hard, and I don't see a lot of finger pointing, and they want good things to happen for themselves and Coach Walters and staff. But, the schedule is not lightened up on them. I think we've played 5 out of the top 8 teams in the country this year, with Indiana coming up to where they are. And so I just think it's just been tough week after week, and when one bad thing happens, it seems to domino into a lot of bad things happening. So I think if Purdue can get off to a decent start tomorrow against Penn State, maybe they stay close and make this interesting, but it's just been, the offense has struggled. The defense, can't get them off the field. The offense can't convert and keep the ball and extend drives and those types of things. So it's just it's been an extremely frustrating year, and nobody saw this coming. So I'm just hoping for a good, strong finish here in these last 3 games and then just see what happens.
Well, Mark, I'll tell you what, you're a true gentleman. I mean, we've had fun over the years doing some radio here and there, but this was on very short notice, and I think excellent perspective I thought you could add on the quarterback position, certainly from a young player for Anthony Richardson, and I knew you would have good insight, and I appreciate you sharing it on very short notice today.
Hey, my pleasure, Jake. Anytime, give me a call, but enjoyed it, and let's hope the Colts can get a victory this weekend and get things turned around.
Appreciate it, Mark. We will talk to you
right.
soon. Mark Herrmann joining us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line, one of the true great guys around the area, and really good stuff just in terms of what you want to see out of Anthony Richardson. I think the foot placement and the accuracy. I mean, Eddie, just like we were talking about, right? That's just the one thing that you need to see is that hitting the layups are just so critically important, hitting the layups. Mark, of course, a great player at the high school level at Carmel High School before he starred at Purdue. There are plenty who are going to be playing at the high school level tonight. Kyle Neddenriep, Indy Star, joins us to talk about and preview that next. You know what, Eddie? I might go to the Monon Bell game tomorrow.
Really?
Yeah.
Can I go with you? Can we be buds?
I don't know that we want to get too far ahead of ourselves here, do we?
Will that make Derek Schultz jealous if we were hanging out at the Monon Bell game?
I've got an invite here from somebody that said you can come hang out for the Monon Bell game from the DePaul side. The only problem is I kind of like Wabash. When I went to the Monon Bell game all 4 years that I was at Indiana University, and Wabash won all 4 of them. And
I've never been.
Went as a Wabash fan because my buddy Brad Fields is who I went with, and he was at Wabash at the time. But it's awesome, I'm telling you. But somebody from DePaul is the one that has extended an invitation to come hang out. Does that make me a jerk if I go, but I'm rooting for Wabash?
I think so.
Am I obligated to root for DePaul, for the Dannies?
I think you have to.
Well, I mean, my uncle Jack Swope had a bunch of real estate in Cloverdale, which is near Greencastle, so that kind of makes me an honorary Danny to an extent, right? I think my cousin went there. But then I have a cousin at Wabash. I'm very conflicted. That's the beauty of the Monon Bell game. 130th tomorrow, by the way. 9-0 DePaul, 8-1 Wabash. Going to be a good game. Joining us now on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line, not to talk about the Monon Bell game, although I'm hoping he's been to one at some point in his time here in Indiana, Kyle Neddenriep, talking high school football. And big one tonight, Kyle. I'm assuming that you are going to be watching Lawrence North and Brownsburg in 6A. This is a big one.
Yeah, that's where I'll be, and should be an outstanding game. And there's probably 3 or 4 tonight that are at that level, and I would say this one's definitely right at the top of the list, and kind of a new sort of a new game, I guess, if you really think about it, as far as teams playing this long into the tournament. Not that they haven't won sectional titles before, but it always seems like you have a Ben Davis or a like we see with the Center Grove Warren game tonight, more of the traditional powers, in 6A, and these teams have been good. Especially Lawrence North here the last few years, and then Brownsburg building up, with John Hart there as coach, and have been at this level, but haven't been able to kind of get through to the next level. So I think that's kind of the storyline going into tonight. And how does Lawrence North, handle things? They're kind of more of the target team now than they have been throughout, maybe throughout in the past, and especially this year until they got that number 1 ranking. And then how does Brownsburg, come back from that big comeback win last week? Can they keep the momentum going from that win over BD? So it should be a great atmosphere. Looking forward to covering that game tonight.
Center Grove is also taking on Warren Central in 6A. Warren Central's defense was so dominant at the first part of the year, Kyle. Have they been able to kind of recapture that?
Yeah, they have. I was actually out there yesterday, and I think they feel, you never know. I think they feel pretty good about where they're at, defensively. And, the schedule got tougher. I don't think we expected them to shut out every team they played. And as the year went along, obviously they played some tougher competition. But I think the most impressive thing to me is that, they had the Lawrence North loss. I covered that game, and I think it was week 7. And they were undefeated going into that game, and Lawrence North just kind of laid the wood to them a little bit. I was impressed the way they responded to that. I think that tells you a lot about a team, is how do you respond to adversity. They came back and beat Carmel and Cathedral beat Carmel handily, and then beat Cathedral in a really good game. And Cathedral's a tough team. So I think, their defensive line with, Burris committed to IU yesterday. You got Shanklin going to LSU. You got Jeremy Finch, who's basically his teammates are recruiting him to the different schools. He's got, now LSU, Notre Dame, and IU commits as teammates. So it's kind of funny talking to him yesterday a little bit about that. But, he's only a junior, going to have all kinds of offers, already does. And then, Marcus Bell, who, he's had a great year along that line for Warren. He's not as highly touted because he's not as tall as those other guys, but, his numbers stack up. So the interesting that, to me, it's like, can they pressure Gabe McWilliams? That be able to, and how does McWilliams handle that? Can he get the ball out to those great receivers he has for Center Grove, and let those guys create some plays? Drake McClurg's only a sophomore, but he's had an awesome year for Center Grove. Tristan Baxter and Brevin Holobar also. So, that'll be, I think, the key matchup is how do they, how they handle Warren's pressure, how they are able to run the ball. a team that hasn't ran the ball. You really hasn't run the ball great this year, but that's kind of been their MO for Eric Moore's history there. So, that a lot of intrigue in that game. I'm looking forward to following that one along tonight and see how it goes. But it's a night where you wish you could be in several places, and that's definitely one of them.
Kyle Neddenriep is our guest on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line, talking about the slate of games tonight, regionals in the state. All right, let's give some love around the area to other teams that are playing. Westfield and Fishers also in 6A. Now, Eddie Garrison is a pride of Decatur Central.
That's right.
And Eddie's head is big enough that he's going to paint his face, and he actually has written on it, "Let's go Hawks, Decatur Central beat East Central 5A regionals." That game at 7:30 tonight. Your thoughts on the Hawks, Kyle?
It's a rematch, Jake. Come on now.
Eddie should be really confident, I think, after the way they handled their sectional games. That's definitely the toughest sectional to get through in 5A, and they passed those tests pretty easily. Especially last week you kind of thought that Plainfield game would be closer, and Decatur Central wins 35-7. So impressive job, especially defensively. The defense at times has given up some points this year, but to hold Plainfield in that good running game to 7, I think gives you confidence, because that's kind of the team East Central is. They definitely want to run the ball. This is a different team. East Central last year was, I think they were a top 5 team in the state, regardless of class. They were that good. They went into that Northwood game in the state finals and just kind of blew the doors off them, 42-14. That was a very good Northwood team. But now they don't have Josh Ringer, who was Mr. Football last year. A lot of their best players are gone, but they're a program that kind of rebuilds every year. They always are going to be good. Jake Miners has been there as coach for a while now, and they have tradition. But I like Decatur, especially being at home. This is a game where it's a pretty big travel distance. Ron Colley's had to make that trip down there before. New Pal had to go down there last year, and it's a tough place to go win. The fact that Decatur's at home, I like their chances. And they're just, I know we've talked about it before, but their speed's a different level than a lot of teams see. And East Central playing up in 5A, they normally a 4A team, maybe, they're definitely used to playing good competition. I mean, they play Moeller every year, so they're used to playing really good teams. But I think this Decatur team is also not just talented, but also very motivated to win a state championship. After being there last year, I think they're pretty focused on their what's ahead for them right now. All
right, 4A, give some love to New Pal Chatard.
Yeah, I mean, that could be the best game of the night. I can't imagine. You might want to get there now if you're going to this game, because I don't know how people are going to park over there with kind of limited spots, and it's going to be wild. But yeah, this is going to be a fun one. Obviously, two programs with a ton of history, but not necessarily between each other, but making deep runs in the tournament. Was over at Chatard this week. I know they're excited about this opportunity, and I know New Pal is too. But I think that game is just going to be I can't imagine it won't be close. Both offenses have played really well, and Chatard a little bit more tested, I would say, through the sectional. They had to beat Roncalli last week, so it's not like you're game planning ahead of Roncalli. So, whereas New Pal, I think, had a little bit easier time. They had a little bit of a struggle with Mount Vernon earlier in the sectional, in the first week of the sectional, but the last 2 weeks against Yorktown and Pendleton Heights really able to roll pretty easily. And, Kyle Ralph's teams this time of year are always so good. And, you think about up front with what they have with Michael Thacker and, going to Ball State. And then their running game with Raines has really been it's kind of been a hallmark of their team through the years, their running game. And Raines has had a really good season for them. So they can do both. They can throw and pass. But I think we'll see, them try to establish the run tonight. And then on the other side, Chatard's got a really good quarterback in Jack Harrington, who's been able to have a really good season. So, yeah, and Harrison Forrestall, who's their tight end. I think we've talked about him before too, but good target for them, and he's had a nice season as well. So I can't wait to see what happens there either. That's just going to be such a fun atmosphere, first of all, and it should be a great game. And honestly, if you start looking ahead, and you wonder, looking back when the season's over, you wonder if this is maybe the state championship game here tonight at Chatard. So that should be a great game, and we'll see what happens. But I can't imagine that won't be a great one too.
3A, Tri-West is carrying the flag for Central Indiana, essentially, amongst all the teams left in 3A. They've got Batesville. Then in 2A, let's wrap with this one, Kyle. I wanted to give, and I know Sheridan is playing in Class A. They got South Putt. But in 2A, wanted to give a little bit of love. Indianapolis Lutheran, I know that J&V's Eastern Green is going to be taking on Adams Central. I think. Is that the same Eastern that he went to, Eastern Greentown? And Adams Central?
He went to Eastern Green.
This is Eastern Greentown. Yeah. Sorry. Okay. But Indianapolis Lutheran and LaPel in 2A.
Yeah, that's this Lutheran team. When you go into the year, you're kind of wondering how they handle the step up to Class 2A. Well, they're handling it very well, I would say. 3-time champion in 1A the last 3 years, and now kind of rolling through their sectional so far, which had some really good teams in it, like Heritage Christian and Monrovia. And, this LaPel team, a little bit different than maybe more similar to Heritage Christian. They like to throw the ball. LaPel likes to do that as well. But Lutheran with Jackson Willis at quarterback and L.J. Ward at receiver, and they got all kinds of weapons and really good defense, too. I think that's kind of been maybe something, we talk a lot about the offenses and all the numbers they've put up in their state championship seasons, but defense has been a real hallmark, too, especially recently for this team for Dave Pash. And they're tough, man. LaPel should have a great crowd. I'm sure that'll be fun for them to host this regional, and they have a really good team. And Tim Miller's done a great job building that program up over the years. But this will be a tough challenge. Devin Craig is their quarterback. He's a really good one of the best in the area. So they'll have a fighting chance, I think. But just overall with that Lutheran squad, they're just such a juggernaut this time of year. And we'll see what happens, but Lutheran looks like they may be the favorite again in 2A.
Kyle Neddenriep, Indianapolis Star. I know basketball season underway, boys and girls. Your previews are all available at indystar.com. We'll get into that more with you as we kind of wind down from football season, but appreciate the perspective on all the regional matchups tonight, and we will talk to you soon. Have fun as you watch Lawrence North and Brownsburg, Kyle.
Awesome. Thanks, Jake, and good luck tonight, Eddie.
There you go, Eddie.
I appreciate that.
Luck to your Hawks, right?
Luck is not needed by this confidence that I have in Kyle Enright.
Okay. By the way, there is something taking place tonight that is a throwback. We're going throwback, baby, and I'm looking forward to it. I'll tell you what it is and my probably uneducated prediction on what's going to happen tonight in the world of sports next. I did not have a double shot of whiskey because I was coming off the, let's say, procedure. But did go out for dinner and started chatting with a couple of guys sitting next to me.
Now, do you chat with people or do people chat with you? I would say, what's the ratio of you going up to somebody and talking to them or them coming up to you and talking to you when they realize who you are?
That would be a good question to ask Shannon. Really good question to ask Shannon. Probably 50-50, to be honest with you.
Do they come up to you and say, hey, I'm in the company?
I have had that happen. I'm always flattered when people do that, by the way. And I did have somebody, when I was picking up the sandwich, knowing that I was going to have my procedure yesterday, I picked up a sandwich on, I guess it would have been Wednesday night to put in the fridge to have, because you know you're starving when you get home. And somebody sent a post on the X Twitter that said, before everybody made the move to Blue Sky apparently, but said, like, I think I just saw Query at Hoagies and House, but I wasn't sure if it was him. And I'm like, yeah, of course. You should have come up and said hi. So if you ever – that sounds so ridiculous to say. I'm always surprised that people recognize me because I'm on radio, number one, and number two, I'm always shocked that people listen to the show.
Well, Jake, don't you remember earlier this week when you were talking about yourself and how strapping of a man you are?
Well, I mean, there's no doubt about that. I think people are probably stunned by the sexiness, right? It takes them a second to get over that. They're like, I had no idea that's the kind of beauty I was hearing on the radio, right?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
So I'm listening to these two guys, and they're talking about tonight. And they are going on, and they're like, what do you think is going to happen, and this and that. And I knew certainly that this was going to happen, but I didn't know that it was tonight. Now, that's when I kind of interjected because it was two younger guys. And I'm like, guys, you guys are younger than me, but I got to tell you, this is right in my wheelhouse because I think it's almost impossible to explain to people that were not around at the time when it happened. And I can tell you, it was February 10th of 1990 in Tokyo, Japan, when this moment took place. And everybody's watching like this isn't happening, right? And then...
It's over. It's over.
Mike Tyson has been knocked out.
Unbelievable.
I'm telling you, watching Buster Douglas jump around, and you can hear, in just a second, you'll hear Jim Lampley.
This makes Cinderella look like a sad story. What Buster Douglas has done here tonight.
No one knew, and you hear...
Let's go ahead and call it the biggest upset in the history of heavyweight championship fights. Say it now, gentlemen. James Buster Douglas, undisputed heavyweight champion of the world.
That was so impossible to fathom. No, I mean, impossible to fathom. Mike Tyson, of any athlete that has come along in my lifetime at his peak, was absolutely the most impossible to imagine defeat finding. And yet it happened with Buster Douglas, who, I don't know, probably 15 years ago, because Buster Douglas now runs a boxing gym in Columbus and brought over some boxers here to the Indiana Gold Gloves, not to the Gold Gloves, but to a boxing event that Keith Boggs, who works with Gold Gloves, was putting on, and Buster Douglas was here. Could not be a nicer guy, and now just still works in boxing, very humble. But that was so impossible to fathom because Mike Tyson was absolutely appointment must-see TV. If you think that Tiger Woods and his rise through and winning the Masters was captivating, if you think LeBron or Jordan were captivating, I mean, all of them were. I'm not selling short any of that. But because of the infrequency in which boxing takes place at the ultimate and highest level, every single Mike Tyson fight, whether it be against Riddick Bowe or Frank Bruno or Razor Ruddock or no matter Peter McNeely when he came back, but when he was beaten by Buster Douglas, it literally stopped. I mean, people were like, there's no way that this happened because Spinks and Tyson. I mean, people would buy the pay-per-view knowing they were blowing their money because the fight was over before they even sat down. So these guys were talking about it tonight with Tyson and Jake Paul and the anticipation of it, and I nostalgically am looking forward to it just because of what it means and symbolizes. And I know Mike Tyson is a convicted rapist in the state of Indiana, and I in no way, shape, or form am I taking away the severity and the heinous nature of that crime. But I guess in terms of the judicial nature of it, he paid his debt to society, and now is a figure that a lot of people maybe unfortunately and sadly have forgotten about that nature of his past. In Indianapolis, that part of his legacy absolutely needs to be mentioned and reminded because of the severity and the heinous nature of the brutality of that crime. Don't get me wrong. But just boxing in general away from UFC and to see Jake Paul and Tyson tonight, what I am fascinated by more than anything else is this legit? Is this going to be a legit fight, or are we going to tune into it and find out that this was an absolutely PR hoax where they just dance around and hug on each other? And I think personally that's what's going to happen. I think this is going to be one of those things where they go out and they fight to a draw and they each have a couple of shots. Yeah, maybe I'm wrong, and I hope it is legitimate because I long for the days of the truly great heavyweight boxing, and I realize this wouldn't be that because Tyson's an older guy, but you get what I'm saying. But I think it's going to be fascinating tonight. Kevin Bowen joins us. We'll talk Colts. We'll find out who is in and who is out for their game on Sunday. We'll do it all next. 2 o'clock hour underway in Indianapolis. For that matter, the 2 o'clock hour is underway everywhere in the Eastern time zone.
That's one of my favorite Jake Queryisms right there.
My name is Jake Query. By the way, Jimmy Cook will be back with us on Monday. Eddie Garrison's voice you just heard, joining us now on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest line. You hear him in the mornings with Andy Sweeney, the wake-up call with KB and Andy. Kevin Bowen, who has been essentially living at the Colts complex over the course of the season. Kevin, I'll begin with this. From your perspective, did you feel that there was we talk a lot about, I think it's kind of a buzzword, but the culture of a franchise. I'll just go with mood. Did the mood of the franchise change once we found out there was a change back to Anthony Richardson?
Yeah, I think a little bit. I think it can be overblown a bit. I think it's a little interim coachy. The energy you sometimes see. Jeff Saturday wins his first game and then he loses his next 11. Sometimes you just naturally get the initial jolt of it. So I think some of that is there. And so now we'll see, does it translate to Sunday? Does it translate, for future weeks? But, yeah, I think for the most part it was this, rallying around it and, hey, let's believe in him and, let's earn our captaincy. Some of the guys mentioned this week and kind of helping him along and realizing that so many of those guys that are captains have done the Band-Aid thing, and there's a reason why that hasn't worked out. And so let's try to be open-minded to see if this could work. And obviously some major development is needed.
Kevin, the Richardson himself, do you think it was only 2 weeks? So, there were a lot of us, myself included, maybe I was wrong. I mean, when he got yanked, my first thought was there's no going back to this because the precedent historically when a player is drafted high and then is sat and then comes back, it doesn't go well. But it was only 2 weeks. So maybe this was just a discipline chair. Maybe it was get healthy. Who knows what everything was that goes into it. But is there any way to really, truly know the psyche of Anthony Richardson and how he will be able to handle it?
Yeah, probably not. It's obviously a fascinating thought, just exactly how he has handled, quite a humbling moment for him, certainly played out in the public light. It's very, very different than how he has been treated, throughout his NFL career. So, yeah, how he handles that, there's part of me, Jake, and I mentioned this to Andy earlier today, like the last time we saw Anthony Richardson on a football field, he did tap out, and there was a lot of public humiliation directly affiliated with that play. So, does that impact him on the field on Sunday? And again, 2 weeks, I guess, since that moment, or I guess longer than 2 weeks once he gets to Sunday, maybe that won't be as alive in him. But I thought in the immediate aftermath of that play, assuming he would play the next week, I thought you could see, a borderline reckless Anthony Richardson of, wait, all these people are calling me soft and calling me out. Well, watch this. I'm not sliding. I'm not going out of bounds. I'm going to be running dudes over. And again, I'm probably making too much of it now 3 weeks out of that play. But, I'm curious, do we see, some of that from him? But, obviously 2 weeks is not going to cure the inaccuracy issues and things like that. And Shane Steichen even said as much today. So, I think a lot of it just has to do with, all right, those little details. Can you identify, one more thing at the line of scrimmage every series? Does that lead to one more better play every series? Does that mean, again, one drive turns into 3 points instead of a punt, 7 points instead of a field goal? Does that add up? Maybe, again, maybe I'm making a little bit too much of it, but I think in an ideal world, that's what you would be hoping for from him.
The final practice before the Colts head out east, Kevin, they look pretty healthy, right? For the most part, where do things stand in terms of who's in, who's out?
Yeah, 52 guys good to go out of that 53-man roster. Bernhard Raimann is the big one, so it'll be 3 rookie offensive linemen in front of Anthony Richardson for the first time in his career. Matt Gonzalez again at left tackle. Now, we saw Gonzalez start at left tackle against Minnesota. And, in that game, the Colts used a lot of tight end help in, giving Matt Gonzalez the rookie help. So if they do that with Richardson, again, that's kind of one less player that can go out, run route trees, et cetera, et cetera. So that'll be a storyline to keep an eye on. But, yeah, everybody else good to go. Michael Pittman Jr. practiced today and yesterday. So his week off was enough for the back injury to give it a go. On that note, I'm kind of curious how they'll divvy up snaps between him and A.D. Mitchell, because I thought A.D. Mitchell took a much-needed step forward last week against the Bills. Does that continue? Again, his playing time was significantly increased. I think it went from 9% to 94% just in 1 week. So, again, how do they factor all of that in? That'll be something to keep an eye on.
Kevin, you worked with me long enough, and we know each other well enough, I think, to know that sometimes I overthink things. Sometimes, as a critical thinker, I think of something and people have to reel me in and go, "Yeah, man, you're way overthinking that." So I'm going to give you, you've had to do that in the past. I'm going to give you the flexibility to do that with me right here. But let me throw to you a scenario, and then I want you to grade how much I'm overthinking it or how possible the scenario really is. Okay. The situation with Anthony Richardson was such that, no matter whose decision it was, whether it was Chris Ballard's decision to have Joe Flacco start, whether that was strictly Shane Steichen, I know that that's what Steichen will tell you, but whether that was, we may never know that for a long time. But the 3 days after saying that Joe Flacco was the guy for the foreseeable future, and then the 180 back to Anthony Richardson, with that, it just so happens that it came in the same week that the two most high-profile recent Colts alumni, who both are on major platforms with a big-time microphone, both called out the stability of the Colts franchise and expressed their frustration with the direction of the Colts because of the inconsistency of the Colts and the way they treated the quarterback position. I believe that Jim Irsay is somebody who is very kind-hearted, who is very passionate. He's not only passionate about his franchise, but also about the way that players who played for him perceive his franchise. I don't think you can rule out the possibility that Irsay heard those two voices in Pat McAfee and Jeff Saturday calling out his franchise and immediately felt like then he had to grab the wheel and turn it back into the direction that would appease the two players that are most linked to his franchise from a public national standpoint. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth there. And you kind of laid it out. I mean, I will say this. Jeff Saturday's words lately have seemed to be kind of directly related to Chris Ballard. Obviously, Chris Ballard did not hire him as the permanent head coach, so I don't know if there's any personal ill will on that end, but it seems to be specifically with Saturday a little bit more directed at Ballard, right or wrong. I'll throw in there. I found the Steichen commitment to Flacco 15 hours later, going back on it, I felt that odd. Like, if you go back a couple Mondays ago, Steichen used the phrase, "We're evaluating everything." That was right after the Houston game. And then obviously that meant that the next day that he was going to tell Anthony Richardson, "You've been benched," and Joe Flacco, "You're the starter." There's not many times in an NFL week where a coach says some dude is the starter on Monday, publicly commits to him for that upcoming game, and then changes his mind the very next day. So, again, from Steichen, it was weird. It was different from him. I do think it was his decision, but I could certainly see in conversations with Jim Irsay having Pat McAfee and Jeff Saturday's comments influence him to a degree. Even the McAfee comments I thought were particularly strong and a bit of a 180 from how he had kind of been viewing the situation, if I have, McAfee's overall read on it correct there. So, I could see Irsay having some influence on it. I think Shane Steichen lives in an absolute football bunker, and I don't think necessarily he is tuning in to the Pat McAfee show or watching Get Up or any of that. But, I could see Irsay's opinion having ex-player influence, certainly.
In terms of Richardson, Kevin, and I know we're not even beating a dead horse here now. I mean, at this point, it's the glue that's holding together a table somewhere. But how long does Richardson get to play well before we can determine whether or not he's forever linked to Chris Ballard? In other words, can Chris Ballard survive if and does Richardson get a longer amount of time because theoretically he is attached at the hip to Chris Ballard?
Great question, and normal NFL precedent just has to almost be thrown out the window with this. I brought this up earlier in the week. The Colts right now are in a 5-game offensive rut where they have scored 20 or less points in each of those 5 games. And if you're trying to read tea leaves on what does any of this mean for big decisions at the end of the year, i.e. Chris Ballard keeping his job, that seems to be the one people most popular clearly talk about. That is the one that indicates past precedent would lead you to say the Colts are going to make changes. If that has happened now, this is the 4th time it's happened under Jim Irsay's ownership since Peyton Manning was drafted. And in the previous 3, he has fired the GM, the head coach, or both. Fired both of them in 2011, fired just Chuck Pagano in 2017, and fired just Frank Reich in 2022. Would Chris Ballard survive that for a 3rd time? I mean, that would be pretty wild that he could. But, certainly when you make a draft pick like that, last April, there's an element of, hey, you're resetting the clocks and, you're tying at the hip. You're tying at the hip, Shane Steichen, Chris Ballard, and Anthony Richardson. So I don't know. Part of me thinks Ballard is still on a bit of an island from those 2, but, conventional wisdom would also lead you to think, hey, maybe, just because you hired the GM, 6 years before you hired the head coach, that's not the case. We saw it with the Indiana Fever, for example, in our own backyard of like, hey, Christy Sides was receiving like Coach of the Year votes, and then she gets fired because new management came in and they want their person. So if you're Jim Irsay, you might really like Shane Steichen. If you're going to bring in a new GM, and you're going to give that GM full autonomy over the head coach to make that decision if he wants. Same thing with the quarterback, of course. So I think these are all just weird elements to the Colts' current structure, and why I was an advocate of just firing Chris Ballard too a couple years ago, because I saw writing on the wall of this inevitably happening where you would get into this awkward state as a franchise of like, wait a minute, is everybody tied to the hip? Are they not tied to the hip? How should they be handled? It just gets messy. It got messy for Chuck Pagano, obviously, in 2017 when he was the lame duck head coach, and the writing was clearly on the wall then, and now I think it's a bit messy for Shane Steichen right now. So I guess I say all that to think that I think at the end of the season you have to individually evaluate Chris Ballard separate from it. Obviously the Richardson thing matters, but there's 6 other years of evidence that's on the Ballard resume, and I think that needs to be taken into consideration as you make the decision moving forward on your franchise.
What realistically, Kevin, at this point is the goal? I mean, the goal for this season. Like what really is, and I don't mean for me, I don't mean for you, I don't mean for the fans. Realistically, I know that teams want to win, right? And the Colts are going to tell you, like, our goal is to win, put ourselves back in position, get into the postseason, and maybe they can turn things around. I don't know. But realistically, if you were to put truth serum in Jim Irsay, let's say, the goal for the rest of the year now and what they hope to see and obtain is what?
Well, if you put Richardson to the side, I mean, somebody's got to be the 7th team in the AFC. And, I mean, if you look at the playoff
I know.
standings
I mean,
right
it's
now,
the vat of suck. I know. I mean, they got a chance, right?
Again, 7 of 16 make it. So, I mean, there is a middle-of-the-pack team. And, if you rattle off the list of teams competing for that spot, it's a lot of how you just described it. So somebody's got to be that. And the Colts have the second easiest schedule of, I would kind of group 6-7 teams together in that area. The Colts have the second easiest schedule in the entire NFL the rest of the season, and the easiest of those teams. They have a head-to-head already against Miami. They could get a head-to-head tiebreaker on New York. They could get one against Denver later in the year. So, again, there is a pathway. I really look at Sunday as the breaking point for that. Like, I just think there is such a difference between 4-7 and losing to a dysfunctional team like the Jets versus 5-6. And, outside of the Lions, you might be favored, frankly, in every game the rest of the season. So I do think we're at a big 60-minute affair coming up on Sunday. So I do think if you're Jim Irsay, you have to view it in kind of that lens. And then as far as Richardson is concerned, when you think big picture about your franchise, just can you see some incremental jump? I mean, again, he was 59% as a rookie, and he's 44% this season. And look, I mean, you're a 500 football team when Richardson starts. So, I mean, it's not like you're 0-6 when he starts. You're a 500 football team, and he's completed 44% of his passes. If he got that number to 50%, 55%, I mean, all these are one-possession games with Richardson under center. If he just gave you a little bit of an incremental jump and consistently did that, now all of a sudden you get to the end of the year and think, all right, maybe this is going in a more positive direction. Maybe the arrow has been flipped. Yeah, we want to send them to, a quarterback throwing guru in the offseason and really kind of, strip it down to the studs and fundamentals from there. But we feel like, Monday through Saturday, he's starting to treat like a professional, and let's kind of move forward with that. I would think, again, it's a very glass half full, but if you're Jim Irsay, that's probably what you'd be hoping and praying for.
By the way, Eddie, I don't know if you noticed. Did you happen to notice on the way in there was an empty Coke bottle outside, and I accidentally kicked it. And I saw a little cloud. Did you see who just entered the studio? By the way, Eddie.
Oh my gosh!
Can you believe it? It's been a while, right? But it appears as though Robin the Genie is here. It is correct. Yes, I wanted to ask Kevin a question. Okay. Kevin, I don't know if you can hear Robin the Genie, but he just popped into the building. Oftentimes he has questions for people that have big financial payoff.
Robin, you still there?
Yes, I am still here.
So what's your question?
My question for Kevin is this. You must write down on a sheet of paper, yes or no. If 3 years from now we open the sheet of paper and the question is Anthony Richardson still a starter for the Indianapolis Colts? If Kevin wrote the right answer, he will get $1 million. Ooh, it's a good question. Kevin, what would you write? Yes or no? Is he going to be the starter in 3 years? We don't know Robin's line of credit just yet, by the way.
Well, that gives me a warm and fuzzy feeling. The Aladdin soundtrack, a favorite of my daughter right now, if I must say so. If we could maybe toss that in there. 3 years from now, is he the starter? No, I can't go there. I just, to your point that you brought up earlier, it is it's pretty rare to see one thrown back into the mix. Now, 2 weeks isn't maybe as long of an absence as some people maybe would have thought it would have been, but 3 years, you will very well be looking at new management that obviously isn't tied to him as a quarterback. That never is a great sign for that quarterback. So I will say no. Now, let me preface by this. Just because that answer is no, and again, I'm not saying that with tons of conviction, I still think you continue to play him the rest of the season, because either you get a good answer and you see growth, or you get a bad answer. And while the bad answer might be the arrow continues to point down on him, maybe you have clarity. Maybe you can pivot. Maybe the draft board starts to fall in April and you're like, wait a minute, I didn't think that quarterback would be there. Let's draft that quarterback because we think Anthony Richardson is not the future. So just because I think it's no doesn't mean I think I need to watch Joe Flacco play any more football this year.
Hang on, Robin hasn't left. Yes, I have a follow-up for Kevin. I have another offer. Kevin, the same question I will ask you, but now it's for $500,000. We are going to ask the same question, same envelope, but open it in Thanksgiving of next year. Will Anthony Richardson on Thanksgiving of next season be the starter for the Colts, yes or no?
Ooh, that is a good one.
Robin runs a tough bargain, man. Robin's tough.
That's the first time he's asked 2 questions.
That's right. Robin usually doesn't have a follow-up.
He must be desperate for the money then.
Right. The Genie realized it's Friday and, Christmas shopping is due here very soon. I will starter.
I'm sorry, you broke up.
I'll say yes.
Okay.
But part of it is probably just because, I can't give you, a actual answer on.
Or, what the plan B would be?
Right. Like who else? Flacco, could retire. Ellinger's on the contract year. I don't know.
A.J. McCarron, baby.
All these, yeah. I'm like, is Jacoby Brissett going to come back?
That's right.
The third time's a charm with Jacoby Brissett here. So, yeah, that's a good one. And I think what all of this does, Jake, is it just creates a harsh reality of the plan at the most important position in sports has zero clarity. And you didn't want to be here. You didn't think you'd be here, and it's an unfortunate state, but that's the question that franchise has had really since Andrew Luck retired. Outside of maybe a 12-month belief that you naturally get after you draft a quarterback in the top 10, I don't think there's been a we are all, Carson Wentz, let's go. Phillip Rivers at most is going to be 2 years. It was 1 year. Matt Ryan at most was going to be 1 year, and it turned into 2 games. And, Gardner Minshew, all of that kind of falls into the same boat.
Kevin, lastly, is the video up in terms of your son's prediction? This one's interesting. No animal on the other helmet. He has to grab the helmet. That determines who wins the game. Has the video been posted?
No, it's not. You know, and he has made a selection. I will reveal it. You know, we went with the buildings last week. He kept on thinking the Bills were the buildings. I think he's used his construction book more than the buffalo on the helmet. Obviously, we know where he's going next week. I mean, a lion's on the helmet. I mean, you know, that's a given. But he did go Jets. He went Jets. I don't know. I mean, Green maybe.
Is he learning spelling? Is that it? The Jets,
No.
Jets.
I know. It's like we don't get many lettered, you know, helmets, multiple lettered helmets. Certainly, you know this quite well. You helmet aficionado, but. Yeah, he went green. He went Jets. Rosie looked at the game last night and was confused and thought the Eagles were the Jets. And so, yeah, he went Jets. And we of course, did it outdoors. You know, that is part of the routine. You know, when the game is outside, we go out into the elements. So we braved the elements last night. Need to post the video, but his 4-6 record will ride on the New York Jets coming up here on Sunday.
Kevin, for your bet of the week, are you going to be wasting more of the Rosie Bowen and Max Bowen college fund on Purdue plus 28.5 against Penn State?
Gosh, can you imagine? I do have a core. I am not. No, I'm not. But I do have a core belief. Thou shalt always do this from a betting standpoint. If any NFL team is getting 2 touchdowns in a game, I'm taking that team as the underdog. This week, I believe for the first time all year, I could be wrong on that, the Jacksonville Jaguars are a 14-point underdog against the Lions. Don't you have to take a 2-touchdown underdog in the NFL?
Yes. I mean, it's so rare, right?
I mean, it's got to be. So I don't know why I do this, but I just routinely go with the bad teams to cover. So I am taking Mac Jones and the Jags to cover against the Lions. That's my lock of the week.
Okay, here's my lock of the week. Wabash over DePaul. DePaul's the one that's undefeated, right? DePaul's 9-0 and Wabash 8-1.
You are correct.
Yeah.
Bell game, undefeated team always gets beat, right?
Well, yeah, I think that's smart. I was talking to somebody this DePaul team is like unreal, like really, really good. So I think if you were creating a line for this one, I believe I got wind it'd be like maybe even around 10. Wabash also very good this season, but DePaul is like, and we had Rick Straw on this morning. He said DePaul might get an at-large bid to the tournament.
Yeah, well, they're going to need it because they're going to be 10-1. Wabash is beating DePaul. That's now that you said that about DePaul. Now I'm starting to hedge a little bit. I'm going.
No, you know how it is. Upsets galore in the Monon Bell. Believe that.
Let me ask you this: what is on the Wabash helmet?
The little guy, right?
No.
The little giant.
I thought it was a W.
It's a big W, isn't it? Which is exactly what they're going to post. W? It might be the little giant now that you mentioned it, Kevin, but I think
maybe their logo is the little giant.
Their logo is the little giant.
It is a big W.
Look at Eddie threw it up like West Side.
Yeah. I didn't cross over the fingers.
It's the W on either side of the helmet to show you exactly what they're going to get when they go. It's in Greencastle this year, right? They're going to go get a GCB and a W. That's what they're going to get. All right, Kevin, enjoy the weekend. Enjoy the games, all right?
Laugh. Wabash always fights. Let's go.
That's right. Kevin Bowen joining us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Gas line. I'm Team Wabash, man. You know, I dated a girl for 2 years that went to DePaul. I got nothing against DePaul. I'm cool with DePaul. I like Putnam County. What county is DePaul's in Putnam County, isn't it? Greencastle? I'm cool with it
for you.
But either way, though, I'm going to roll with the guys that invited me when I was in college to go to. The only problem with the Monon Bell game for me is I went to the Monon Bell game in '93, which was the day that Florida State and Notre Dame played in football.
Putnam.
Yeah, it's Putnam County, right? Okay. So I went to the DePaul Wabash Monon Bell game in '93. It was in Greencastle, but I went with the guy, my buddy Brad Fields and his fraternity brothers at Wabash. So Wabash wins, and I'm going back to their fraternity house on campus in Crawfordsville, like to celebrate the big victory, and they brought the bell back, and it was great. And a dude named Pat Mulry, he's a good dude, went to North Central, but he was a diehard Notre Dame fan, and he was so excited over Notre Dame's win over Florida State, the Charlie Ward Florida State team, where Notre Dame like grew out the grass and wouldn't let him use the practice field, but I digress. So he was so excited about that. Pat Mulry locked himself in his room and played the Notre Dame fight song on repeat for 12 straight hours. It was a complete buzzkill for the weekend. I was like, what are we doing here? I mean, this guy goes to Wabash. He's playing the Notre Dame fight song. Should we do a status check on him? And they do the status check, and he was just sitting in his lazy boy, soaking it in, thrilled over the fact that Notre Dame won. And then the next week, Notre Dame got beat by Boston College, for what that's worth. I don't know how I remember all that stuff, but I remember it well. We'll come back. It is a feel-good, good for the heart Friday from Franciscan Health, and it's a story about perseverance from the West Side that I'll tell you about. It is a Friday. It is halfway past 2 o'clock. That means it is time for the Franciscan Health Feelgood, Good for the Heart Friday. And you know what I say? If you know of somebody that is a feel-good story in the world, overcoming odds, that kind of thing, or just somebody that had a situation where they are making the best of it in the world of sports, I would love to hear about it. My email address, you can always just send it to jakequery@me.com. If you're curious about remembering that email, just simply remember it's my two favorite people, Jake Query and me, jakequery@me.com. I want to talk to you about Matthias Pfister. And that name, you may say to yourself, that name doesn't ring a bell to me, but it will after I tell you this story. Think about this when you were in the 7th grade. Eddie, you remember the 7th grade?
Briefly, Jake, I do.
It's a great time, the 7th grade, because that's really the age where, you're halfway through middle school. You're starting to
develop
and get your eye on getting into high school and figuring out what it is you want to do athletically or academically. And that was the situation for Matthias, who, like so many, loved playing a number of different sports. Played baseball. That was his best sport. Football, basketball. And then he had an injury, actually, that limited him in terms of baseball. He had an arm injury and was going to work his way back from that, and worked his way back and was trying to figure out which sport was going to be his sport. That's kind of what happens to you, right? When you're that age, is you're figuring out. That's the best part of it. And I've always said for folks and for parents that don't hyper-focus on one sport. Introduce yourself to as many sports as possible, because oftentimes something you learn in one sport transitions into and helps you and relates you to being good at a different sport. And in Matthias's case, he loved baseball the most, but he also liked playing football. He also liked playing basketball. And then something happened to him in February of 2020. He was in the car with his dad, and they were involved in a terrible car accident. And when the EMTs arrived on the scene, they noticed that his dad was injured, but it was Matthias that they were particularly concerned about. He was a young kid, obviously. He was trapped inside the car. They had to go to great lengths to get him out of the car, and then when they got him out of the car, they realized that he needed to be hospitalized immediately because of a number of different things that had impacted him literally and figuratively in that car accident. Young Matthias, who had yet to even get into high school at that point, all of a sudden it wasn't getting into Ben Davis that became the priority. It wasn't trying to transition yourself towards figuring out whether you can be a JV or a varsity or even a freshman athlete in high school, but rather strictly getting there. He was hospitalized for 88 days in 2020, that year that so many of us want to forget anyway. But this all happened, if you think about when COVID first began, go back a month before even that, and then take it all the way through basically when the world was shut down. His body was shutting down. He was in ICU for 9 of the 88 days that he was hospitalized, and the big concern was the fact that he had suffered a traumatic brain injury. And then because he suffered the traumatic brain injury, just when they started to get him stabilized and he came out of it, then he suffered a stroke because his body was working oh so hard to come back from everything it had been through, especially with that traumatic brain injury. And with that stroke, once he came out of that, and once Matthias was released after his 88 days in the hospital, he knew that things were going to be different for him because he lost vision in his right eye. His left eye can see at about 85%, but he really has no peripheral vision at all. But when you're overcoming things like that, it's not necessarily the peripheral vision that's the most important, right? It's the straightforward vision and the vision in yourself and the belief, which is what Matthias had, along with, of course, his parents and his community. And he told me that coming back from that and fighting back and realizing that sports were going to change now, he said it was difficult at first because I knew I couldn't play football because of the fact that it's a contact sport and I'd had a traumatic brain injury. And he said, I knew I couldn't play baseball because my stroke was such that it left me in terms of the movement of my arms and the fluidity that I needed for baseball. Baseball, my favorite sport, was probably no longer going to be a possibility. And basketball was something that so long as he was shooting straight on, he would be able to continue with. As a matter of fact, one of the real joys and little victories, because life sometimes is just about a little victory first and then a bigger victory later. He was able to play basketball at church and in front of a big crowd one day playing rec basketball at church, hit a three-pointer that brought a rousing ovation from the crowd. And he still plays basketball, as a matter of fact, at the recreational level at church. But when he got to Ben Davis, and so much of high school, when you're just trying to find out about yourself, so much of high school is trying to find that thing in which you can have an identity. And sports is that for so many kids. And for Matthias, he thought for sure that was going to be his ticket to belonging as a Giant, right? But he went through his first 3 years having to watch and having to be supportive of different athletes, the baseball players that he thought for sure he would be joining, the football players that he thought for sure he'd be a part of at that great program at Ben Davis. Eventually, he found his sport. And you could say better late than never, because it was in his senior year now, because Matthias is a senior, that he found his sport. And yeah, he had his limitation because of the vision, for example. But what sport can you play where your vision, most importantly, literally and figuratively, is to simply look and focus straight ahead? His coach said this about him. He has a desire to get better and admiration of the team. He's consistently asking questions on what he can do to improve. He puts in extra practice time during the week outside of the scheduled practice and even tells the top varsity teammates, watch out, I'm coming for you. He's an incredible teammate. That's what Greg Poley, the coach at Ben Davis, told me about Matthias Pfister, who was on the bowling team at Ben Davis. And it wasn't until his senior year that he decided to start bowling, because he said he wanted to be around his friends and simply be a part of something. And he said, it was about adjustment. I'll never forget the first time he told me that they lined me up to show me how you line up for bowling. And then I realized that because of my vision and because of some of the challenges I had to turn my body a different direction to see the lane in a different fashion. But I figured out how to do that, make the adjustments, and now I'm averaging 120 per bowling, and recently bowled his high game of 160. But isn't that kind of what it's all about? The fact that certain people might have to see it one way, but Matthias had the presence of mind, the maturity, the comfort level to know that he had to simply turn his body a little bit differently to be able to look at things a little bit differently than maybe the way it would have been designed for him originally. But in doing so, he was able to overcome that challenge to become an even better version of himself as a bowler and as a student. Because, yes, he had a traumatic brain injury, and, yes, he spent the better part of his latter part of his middle school years not only hospitalized but in ICU. But how about this? His favorite class is Spanish. Spanish, right? I told him, I said, I took 4 years of Spanish and then another 2 years of it in college, and to be able to know that that's your favorite subject speaks of an intellectual aptitude well beyond what I probably can grasp. But this is the best part about it for Matthias, because I think so much of life is taking the hand that you're dealt and figuring out how you're going to deal those cards to be aces to everybody else. That's exactly what Matthias has done, because he got accepted early into IU Indy for neuroscience. And he would like to himself become somebody that helps out therapeutically with those moving forward once he goes into neuroscience studies, presumably at IU Indy, where he's already been accepted into that program. An unbelievable story for him, but also one of great perseverance and finding your way even when all of a sudden things have been altered a little bit. And when I talked to Matthias, who, by the way, right now is out in Long Beach, California at a Catholic church convention, but when I talked to him, I said, you know what, Matthias, it's kind of like people who have gone through, say, a heart attack or any sort of a health ailment. You really have two choices on the outside of it. You either say to yourself, like, woe is me, or you say, I guess now I've got a way to try to make sure that I'm making some sort of an example for other people that might help them out. And that's exactly what Matthias is doing for his teammates. Greg Pulley talked about it. Setting the example to his teammates of, look, I'm going to be the best that I can be, so what's your excuse? And yeah, you might be naturally a better bowler than I am, or maybe have better vision in terms of your periphery, but in terms of being able to see straight down the lane and keeping my eyes where they need to be, that's exactly what Matthias has been able to do, and it's an example for everybody on his team, and I love everything about it, and I love the fact that Ben Davis and the bowling program gave him an opportunity, in fact, in the end, to do what we all want to do, and that is be a teammate and have a belonging. Now, when it comes to your heart health, the number one heart program in Indiana for cardiology by Health Grades, number one in Indiana for interventional coronary care and major cardiac surgery by CareChecks is Franciscan Health. And they are offering affordable heart scans right now for just $49. $49. You can self-refer, pay out of pocket. You get a free heart health risk assessment included with every screening. And there's no reason not to get the scan, especially if you've had family heart history like myself. If you've battled with obesity or diabetes, if you're a former smoker, then the heart scan is an important thing to do. You can always call to schedule it at 833-238-0688. I know you're not going to remember 833-238-0688. I get that. You can always go online to franciscanhealth.org/screening bundles, or simply Google Franciscan Health Heart Scan to get that non-invasive, very easy scan for just $49 and the peace of mind or simply the preventative measure that comes with it so that you don't have to put yourself in a position. Because sometimes, by the way, it's about simply seeing clear all the way down the lane, which is what Matthias did and which is what I hope you folks do when it comes to your heart health. If you have any questions about that, or you have somebody that you think would be a good candidate to share their story, tell their story on a Feel Good Friday, please email me. jakequery@me.com, easiest way to remember it. We'll come back. We'll put a tie on all of it, get you set for the weekend, and hand you off to John next. All right, you just heard JMV mention it. He's going to be at Whiskey Business, Southport Road. Plenty of time to get down there, enjoy a cold one. Diet Coke's perfectly sufficient. To get set for the weekend itself, Colts and Jets coming up on Sunday. You know that will be a big topic of discussion for us on Monday, as well as recapping the Pacers and Heat. They have a two-step with them starting tonight and then again on Sunday. A reminder, the Colts broadcast from beginning to end will be heard on our sister station, Hank FM. It also, from the pregame up until the Pacers pregame, can be heard on this radio station, and then the Pacers broadcast will take over, I believe, at 4:30 on Sunday. Correct, Eddie?
Correct.
Okay,
Jake.
your prediction for the game on Sunday, Eddie?
I went Colts 20-16 over the Jets.
Okay. I think Anthony Richardson, I don't think that he's going to come out and necessarily lay a complete egg, but I think there might be some rust. I hope I'm wrong in that. And in terms of the Jets, I think they scored just enough. 21-17, I will say that the Jets win. I certainly hope I'm wrong in that. But we will discuss all of it coming up on Monday. Thanks again, Kevin Bowen, Chris Denari, Mark Herrmann joining us today, Kyle Neddenriep as well. John's up next. Thanks for listening to Query & Company.